really have much to show. So being secretive made it appear that he had more than he really had.
As Next burned through capital, Jobs faced a tough choice: abandon the computer or face bankruptcy.
Jobs always loved the computer as art object. It was a big deal when they realized that very few people were buying their hardware, but it turned out that their software was just breathtaking.
The decision? Ditch the highly designed computer and focus instead on selling what makes it run, the company's elegant operating system.
A thing you have to understand about Steve Jobs, he can be outrageously ambitious and idealistic, but he can also be practical when he has to, because this man is a survivor.
I think that period during which he wandered in the wilderness was a period full of adversity. And I think people come back from adversity. If they can return from adversity, they come back harder, sharper, and far more geared for battle.
In a 2005 commencement address at Stanford University, Steve Jobs revealed for the first time some personal details about his early life.
My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates. My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life.
He was raised by parents who adopted him. They were blue-collar, salt-of-the-earth people. They were good parents, but they weren't intellectuals. They weren't artists. They weren't creative geniuses. And Steve Jobs knew from early on that he was different. Later in life, he discovered that his biological parents were intellectuals. And his biological sister, she turned out to be a brilliant novelist, Mona Simpson.
In 1991, at age 36, Jobs started his own family when he married Laureen Powell. They have 3 children in addition to his daughter from a previous relationship. Jobs calls these years after Apple his most creative and personally fulfilling. His professional life was also changing dramatically. Another of his post-Apple computer business ventures was slowly coming to life. Right after his ouster from Apple, Jobs bought a company from Lucasfilms that would become a household name.
This little animation company called Pixar.
He'd always sort of admired Hollywood, from afar. Oh, I'd like to be a part of that somehow.
So they hired an animator from Disney named John Lasseter, and they started making these very amusing 1-2 minute films. It was kind of like a demo. Well, it turns out that the films were wonderful, and not just from a technical standpoint, but creatively.
In fact, the Pixar team had much bigger ambitions. The creation of a full-length, fully computer-animated feature film. Their technology was now powerful enough to make it a possibility, and Hollywood was interested.
Pixar made a deal with Disney to work together to make Toy Story.
I actually had made the deal with him at the time. This is a gutsy guy. He came into the movie business. His instincts were impeccable. Put his money up, his own personal money. He was on the line.
In the decade after he left Apple, Steve Jobs nearly spent through his entire fortune. He nearly blew it all on both Next and Pixar, 2 struggling startups that were just losing money at an alarming rate.
In 1995, Jobs' investment in Pixar was about to pay off in a big way. Toy Story, Pixar's first feature film, was a blockbuster.
I am Buzz Lightyear. I come in peace.
Oh, I'm so glad you're not a dinosaur!
It earned $356 million worldwide and became 1995's highest-grossing U.S. movie.
Pixar, which really created probably the most successful genre in the movie business today, which is CG animation.
It was an enormous success. And based on the incredible performance of Toy Story, Pixar was able to go public, which wound up making Steve Jobs a billionaire.
It had been 10 years since he'd been fired from Apple, and the drama and turmoil at the company continued to get worse. In a 1996 interview for the PBS series Triumph of the Nerds, Jobs' wounds were still apparent.
He destroyed everything I'd spent 10 years working for, starting with me.
Today, in a surprising admission, John Sculley looks back on the Apple Board of Directors' decision to oust Jobs.
In hindsight, I think they made the wrong choice. You know, they should have chosen Steve. The talent that Steve has is so extraordinary. We should have figured out how to work with it.
Scully's replacement, Michael Spindler, was also gone, and a third CEO, Gil Amelio, was struggling to keep the company afloat. Apple Computer was out of ideas and desperate.
After Steve left the company, it lost its compass, lost its mission. It lost its founding spirit. Its products got old and stale. And during that whole period, Microsoft had gotten stronger and stronger.
Computers running Windows accounted for nearly 80% of the market. Apple's market share could not break 11%. And their ousted co-founder was sitting on an operating system that could save them.
This is why they ended up going back to Jobs, because they wanted Next's operating system. It's like the secret sauce, it's their springboard into all the future products.
In an ironic and stunning turn of events, Apple Computer bought Next for over $400 million.
We're going to be building our next generation operating system on Next technology.
Selling Next to Apple, well, that's sheer genius. You just have to say, wow. Gil was sort of a victim of the time, you know. The board made a change again.
Steve Jobs returned to the company he helped create and became interim CEO.
And so there began what I think is the greatest turnaround in the history of corporate America.
After a dozen years in exile, Steve Jobs returned to the company he co-founded.
He just sensed the vacuum and moved in to fill it. The old juices started to flow. It was his finest hour, really, and he hauled ass and brought things back together again around a cohesive vision because he came in as the rainmaker.
I don't think he for a moment deluded himself about the pickle that he inherited. We have old products, nobody's buying it, we've got declining market share, we don't have anything that's really exciting and interesting. Our cost structure is bloated. We're spending way too much money. We have a whole load of deadbeats inside of our company. The management isn't very good. He was really realistic.
Jobs brought faith in his own vision, which meant simplifying and cutting Apple product lines.
He called a big meeting in this big meeting room, and he says, you know what's wrong with this company? And everyone's too scared to answer. No one will say anything. And he goes, the products suck. They've got no sex in them.
Steve's point was, why are we selling digital cameras and printers? We're not adding anything special. You can buy better digital cameras from Canon or from printers from Hewlett-Packard, so let's stop doing that. Let's just do the few things that we can do well.
The comeback included a remarkable announcement. Bill Gates, who had long been considered Jobs' main rival, would invest in Apple Computer.
Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple to help save the day. That must have been the low point for Apple.
I happen to have a special guest with me today via satellite downlink. And if we could get him up on the stage right now.
We're very excited about the new release we're building. This is called Mac Office 98. We do expect to get it out by the end of this year.
For some of the truly faithful, you know, it was like Luke Skywalker going to the evil empire and doing a deal with Darth Vader.
We've kept our marriage secret for over a decade now.
In an unusual appearance in the Wall Street Journal's All Things Digital conference in 2007, Jobs and Gates' mutual respect was apparent.
There were too many people at Apple and in the Apple ecosystem playing the game of, for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. And It was clear that